The movement I've chosen is the power clean. It's a multi-joint movement that's used to develop explosiveness and power and strength in athletes. The first position is going to be the starting position here, and then you have the first pull, which is up to the thighs, second pull, which is up to right before the catch, and you have the catch as you come down into the squat, and the recovery is coming back up into the squat. It utilizes triple extension, which is extension of the ankle, knee, and hip, and that's used to develop strength in sprinting and jumping, which is where triple extension is always used. So for that starting position here in that deadlift kind of look, you're going to be static, you're not moving, you're going to have your weight centered over your midfoot. The slack is going to be pulled out of the bar, so you don't have to make up for it during the first pull there. You're going to be in knee flexion, hip flexion, and ankle dorsiflexion. And then as you go into that first pull up to the mid-thigh, it's going to be a slower movement. It's going to have the most force because of the force velocity curve. The bar is going to go from the floor up to the mid-thighs, and you're going to have hip extension, knee extension, and then plantar flexion. You have activation of the quads, the hamstrings, the glutes, the spinae, and the core. The core is more going to be isometric. The quads and hamstrings and glutes are going to be concentric. For the second pull from the hips here, or from the mid-thighs up to the upper clavicle area, you're going to have rapid hip, knee, and ankle extension into plantar flexion, which is going to be your triple extension. This is going to be your point of maximum velocity, and you're going to transition from that smooth movement to the high speed, which is going to lower the force. That way you have to get under the bar there. And you're going to have activation of the quads, hamstrings, glutes, spinae, core again, but then you have the traps, the deltoids, the biceps, and then the calves as well. As you go into that catch there, you're going to transition from pulling and then drop under the bar and catch it to slowest descent. So it's going to be an eccentric movement of the quads, hamstrings, glutes, and core. You see a common trend there with the muscles. You have hip flexion, knee flexion, dorsiflexion, shoulder external rotation, elbow flexion as you come here, your elbow flexing, and also external rotation. Then you have your recovery where you stand up. It's basically a front squat. You have quadriceps, hamstrings, and glutes, concentric movement, hip extension, knee extension, plantar flexion, and you'll stand up from that partial squat into the full extension there, and that is the completed movement. This movement utilizes multiple principles from class. You have your length tension relationship, which says that the optimal length of muscle for force production occurs when there's an optimal overlap between actin and myosin. For the knee joint, that's going to be your quad and hamstrings. They're going to have an optimal overlap at about 20 to 30 degrees of flexion, which is right at that starting position. And then as you extend the knee, it's going to lose force. And as you bend it more into that kind of catch position, you're also going to lose force. You have your force velocity curve, which says that the higher force you have, the lower the velocity. So that slow portion, that initial pull is going to be kind of slower compared to the rest of the movement, but it's going to be the highest force. So then as you get into that second pull, you have a lot more velocity, but it's going to be a lot less force. So that's why you have to kind of get deep in order to catch it. Then you have your stretch shortening cycle, which occurs right at the recovery phase. So as you catch it, you're coming here, the quads and hamstrings are getting stretched, and then they'll store that tension and the velocity in the tendons and muscles, and then that kinetic energy, or the potential energy, is going to turn into kinetic energy to help you stand back up out of that squat. In terms of degrees of range of motion for all the joints, you have your hip, which you need about 100 degrees of flexion, and then you need full extension. For the knee, you need 110 degrees of flexion in full extension. For the ankle, you need 20 degrees of dorsiflexion and then full plantar flexion. For the shoulder, you need 100 degrees of flexion right here in that catch. For the elbow, you need full flexion and extension. Wrist, about 60 degrees of extension here for that catch there. And then for the scapulothoracic, 60 degrees of upward rotation and then 30 degrees of elevation. In terms of other principles, we have our elasticity, which is the ability for a muscle to return to its length after stretching. So if you were to come into that recovery phase and then stand back up, as it stretches down, it needs to be able to contract back to how it was normally. Extensibility is kind of similar to that. It's the ability to get stretched without damage, and then contractility is the ability to create force. If any muscle is off, in any three of these categories, the lift is not going to be performed to the best of your ability. For any movement or lever system, the moment arm is going to be the perpendicular distance from the line of action of the force to the axis of rotation. So for the elbow, this here would be the moment arm, would be my forearm and hand, because the axis is the elbow joint. The torque is going to be the rotational force that's created by the moment arm. For example, the force of the quads is at its strongest during 90 degrees because the moment arm rotating around the knee here is going to be the longest, and as you stand up, it's shortening because the hip is getting closer to the knee there. You see this in the free body diagram I drew. Not very well. We have the barbell here. This guy, he's in the starting position of the clean. You have the force of gravity going down. You have the force, the pulling force going up. This is a strictly vertical movement, so everything is going to be in this sagittal plane here. The internal forces are going to be the muscles that contribute to the lift. The external force would be this gravity here, and then some friction between the feet and the ground, but that's likely negligible. The primary plane of movement is going to be that sagittal plane, like I said. There's a little bit of transverse plane. When you go into the catch here, you can see that since the shoulders are externally rotating and then throwing under, that'll be the transverse plane. Then you have your hip and knee, which are the frontal axis, the ankle, which is the medial lateral axis, and then the shoulder and elbow, which are the longitudinal axis. And then here for the actual application of the movement, I have work, which is force times distance. That's the equation for work. We have 1,300 newtons, which I converted as my actual PR of 305 pounds for the power clean. We have 1.8 meters. The way I found that is I kind of guesstimated a little bit how far it would be from starting position up to the top, and then as you catch, you go back down and then back up again. So I kind of added some numbers there and came out to 1.8 meters. When you multiply those two, you get 2,340 newtons, which is how much work you did. And then you can go ahead and, if you took a recording of the video, which I had it on my phone from previous videos, you can calculate the power, which is work divided by time. So we have that work there, 2,340 newtons, and you divide it by the 3.5 seconds, and it comes out to 669 watts of work that was performed during the movement. As far as application goes for this movement, there's a lot of inefficiencies that you can see throughout just analyzing other people do the movement. You have the bar path drifting away from the body, so a lot of times people like to let it fall out a little bit. You ideally want it to rub against, maybe not rub, but get really close to the shins and the thigh there. That's why you'll see a lot of lifters putting baby powder on their thighs so it slides off easier. You'll see lack of triple extension. People shrugging at the top will help. You can try to tell people to get on their toes more to plantar flex, because that'll put a little more force into it. Having a weak and unstable catch position, so such as you catch it here at the elbows too low, you want to have high elbows, that's a good cue. You'll have a weak core, which leads to the torso falling, or knee valgus at the bottom of that catch position into the recovery, which can also lead to injury. You can have lower back pain from the rounding in the first pull. You can have wrist injury from improper catching, knee injury from poor tracking, and the knee valgus. And in order to prevent some of these, you can do alternative movements first, such as the front squat. This helps strengthen the catch position because it's essentially the same idea. The catch position is a front squat, so it'll help you strengthen your quads and hamstrings and glutes and core during that. It'll help you get used to holding the bar in this position. An RDL is also a good one, which helps your hinge mechanics and it strengthens your posterior chain and then teaches the correct bar path during the first pull.